Your city, your stories. Celebrating the people and places that make Houston shine. It's Great Day Houston. And now, here's your host, Deborah Duncan.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Great Day Houston. It is Election Day, and if you're a registered voter and you did not take advantage of early voting, please don't let the opportunity slip by today. Many of us still take for granted that right. I ran across something in my mother's things that reminded me of my obligation. This is a picture of her voter registration card from 1953, not so long ago. At that time, my parents were subject to a poll tax and literacy test before they could register to vote. That practice was abolished when the 24th Amendment was ratified in 1964. This presidential election has been one of the most contentious on record, but it's not the only time craziness has been a passenger on the road to the White House. Other things happened, they just weren't captured and shared on social media like they are today. Historian Raffi Andonian joins us with some of the most memorable presidential races in the annals of American history. Hello there, Raffi.
It certainly would be social media worthy content, though, back then.
Yeah, right. Okay, this is why history and knowing your history is so important, because it gives you perspective.
It does, and the perspective, I think, also brings levity. So when you have, situations where you think maybe, this is unprecedented, we've never been through something like this, and the world is ending.
We're heading for Armageddon.
No, I think it's important to see history. Sometimes with humor, it gives you that context so that you can actually, relax a little bit and understand that, there have been bigger hills to climb, and you're going to make it through.
Yeah, all right. Okay, I mentioned social media, which we know is kind of crazy today, but there was still a form of media back in the day.
There is, and where I think social media was back then? You go into coffee houses back then, or
rumors,
taverns.
Gossip.
All kinds of rumors and gossip and political debate is being exchanged, almost like your Twitter feed, except it's happening over coffee and sometimes over beer
and
we know
tavern.
How
that goes too.
Exactly.
Somebody says something, the next person adds a few things.
That's right. And there were definitely concerns of false news, as they called it back then, as well. So things just spread around about all kinds of matters of the day.
Yeah. All right. TV changed things because now you're looking at the candidates. Remember that famous debate between President Nixon and President Kennedy at the time, right? And so a lot of people who heard it on radio thought, oh, Nixon won. But those who watched it on TV, Nixon didn't look so good.
That's right. The visual affects things. Now, of course, you were pointing to, your mother's voting card earlier.
Right.
Well, TV affected that too, because I would say that on TV, Bloody Sunday in 1965 and the attempts to march from Selma to Montgomery were a major reason that we had the Voting Rights Act in 1965 that enabled more people to participate in the right of voting. Absolutely.
Yeah,
so I think TV and the visual, that's right. Yeah. Seeing the violence, seeing the bloodshed helped convert the social will, if you will, to get the political capital you need to get landmark legislation through. And
when they saw President Nixon, he had a 5 o'clock shadow and he was sweating. And they were like, no, we're going to go with that other guy. All right, let's go to some of these races that a lot of us might not realize were also contentious. Sure. George Washington, the colony of Virginia.
George Washington, the colony of Virginia before the United States, and Washington is not president, is in the colony, running for the state legislative position. What I think is fascinating, what I don't realize, is the amount of alcohol that was involved in those elections. The first time he ran, he thought he lost, and he thought he didn't serve enough alcohol, so he served even more the next time to 391 voters. He served 160 gallons of liquor.
So it was about the alcohol.
Alcohol was really important, and back then you did a voice vote, so you had to stand up at the courthouse and deliver your vote to the two candidates that are sitting right there in front of you. So you were accountable to who you voted for, and that social pressure matters. Back to, there's no TV, but there is direct viewership from the candidate to the voter.
And that led to a lot of chaos, bribery, rowdiness, and that, of course, led to the reforms that we see today where you can't do certain things.
Over the subsequent century after George Washington period, there was more and more of that, and I would say it got more corrupt over time. And so as a result, you have some of the reforms, including sometimes you see having no alcohol on election day. That's where it comes from.
Right, okay, all right. And then Adams-Jefferson, 1800 race.
Now that's in the United States, election of 1800. Now the United States exists, the country has been formed, and the big deal about that one is, for one, you have an opposition party. The parties don't look exactly like they do today, but for the purposes of conversation, there are these two factions, if you will. Thomas Jefferson leads one against John Adams, who's the sitting president. Well, eventually what happened is that there was no majority in the Electoral College. It actually ended up being a tie. Adams was already out. Jefferson and Aaron Burr came in as a tie. Back then, you don't have a president and vice president on the same ticket. It's whoever finishes first and second goes president and VP. Well, if you have a tie, you have a problem. So the election goes to the House of Representatives. Representatives. When it goes to the House, now there is all kinds of wheeling and dealing that takes place. Alexander Hamilton takes Jefferson's side instead of Burr's side, which later eventually was part of what contributed to the duel when Burr killed Hamilton 4 years later. Believe it or not, that rivalry was
today
there.
Is bad?
And then Jefferson ends up becoming president as a result of that election of 1800 that went to the House of Representatives, where there was some dealing going on. And they call it the Revolution of 1800 because Jefferson felt that his faction was redeeming the American Revolution, restoring America to its old glory that they had just fought for against things.
Old glory when they were like a few minutes
old. That's right, they were a few minutes old.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting is that stuff is still happening today. For example, one of the things that he really didn't like were the Alien and Sedition Acts. You're in politics today. The Alien Acts are being talked about again from 1798.
And some of the accusations they had, they accused each other of being a threat to the Republic.
That's right. That's exactly. That's why it's known as the Revolution of 1800.
Right.
We are bringing back the American Revolution because
but
the other side is a threat
today.
to the Republic.
All right. Jackson and Quincy, election of 1824.
Yeah, you want to talk about threat to the Republic? My goodness, there's a lot of accusations there. So there, the election also ends up in the House of Representatives. Now, Andrew Jackson ends up winning the popular vote by a plurality, does not have a majority, but by a significant margin because the rest of the candidates really split up the votes. But in the Electoral College, he does not have a majority. So what happens? Goes into the House of Representatives to be decided. Well, guess what happens? You can only get the top 3 candidates in the House. So the 4th place candidate drops out and endorses the 2nd place guy, which then puts him over the top, which Jackson, remember, had won the popular vote, but Jackson now loses the election because the coalition that's formed amongst the losers, and he says that election was stolen from me is what he says.
And he was so angry.
And he was so angry, he ran again the next time in 1828.
Sounds familiar
and he won.
again.
Now, you want to hear something funny? He called it the corrupt bargain that the other side did when Jackson came back in 1828. But you know what the other side said about him?
What?
I said, well, he's just the son of a prostitute because they don't even have a dad.
Oh, wow.
So you want to talk about personal attacks and you want to talk about accusations going back and forth and questioned outcomes from the House of Representatives prior, leading to a campaign rally 4 years later. We've seen it before.
Bottom line is human beings have always been human beings. And there's some good points to it, but there's some bad points to it. All right, Hayes-Tilden, 1876.
That's another landmark one. And remember, that is a little more than a decade after the American Civil War. That's the context that we're in.
100 years after becoming a nation.
And 100 years after the American Revolution. Now, they're worried about another civil war breaking up because there's questions about the outcome. So what happens is that you have Tilden, who wins the popular vote, but you have Hayes, who, and Hayes is his opponent, and then neither one wins a majority in the Electoral College. Tilden falls just 1 vote short in the Electoral College, just 1 vote short. So it goes into Congress. Again, we're back in Congress, and what happens in Congress is a commission to understand what exactly happened because there were 3 states that were being contested as to what their outcomes was. Recounts and considering what actually counts as a proper vote. All of this sounds familiar to us because it's happened before. And guess what? All Tilden needed was 1 of those states to go his way. All 3 went Hayes' way, according to the commission, who of course voted along party lines. And so the party that Tilden was a part of said, no, this is not a valid outcome. But behind closed doors, there was an agreement that said, look, if you let Hayes win this, let the states count towards Hayes, even though he didn't win the popular vote, let's let him take the presidency. In return, we, at that point, the party of Lincoln, Republican Party, will pull out federal troops from the South to end Reconstruction, so we no longer have to enforce Reconstruction. And that really changed things because that ended what some call the first civil rights movement, because that was when you had a lot of black rights being enforced post-Civil War. But that ends Reconstruction. But interesting is that there was Tilden's party, which at that point was the Democratic Party, was not willing to accept the election's outcome until there was a trade done. Hey, we'll give you the presidency. You pull out from the soldiers from the South. That was a negotiation, kind of in quiet, quiet behind the closed doors. That's also sometimes known as the grand bargain or the corrupt bargain, some people call it. But the point is that once again, you had a dispute between popular vote and Electoral College. No majority goes into Congress, and there is not clear rules as to what happens in Congress once the election goes to Congress.
That's why we went behind closed doors. All right, we have a little fact or fiction here that we want to play. So the first question is, okay, President Andrew Jackson wanted Texas to join the United States, so he tried to make it happen. Did he really try to make it happen? And by the way, you have a coin.
That's right. From the United States Mint. This is silver coins on each of the presidents that they have going on. You can check them out, usmint.gov. You can see them really cool. Jackson, so did he make it? He loved Texas. He wanted to get Texas into the United States, but he did not actually make an effort to annex it because he was concerned that it might lead to a war with Mexico. He did, however, diplomatically recognize them by sending diplomats there to Texas. Remember, it's a Lone Star state at that point. It's an independent country.
Right. Yeah, Texas as a country.
So Mexico is not happy.
All right. President Martin Van Buren said no to adding Texas because he worried it could start a war with Mexico.
What do you think?
True or false? I think true.
Yes, it is true. He did worry about a war with Mexico. It's something that we might find foreign today. Is like, were we worried about a war with Mexico? Yes, we did. And he also worried if Texas came in, a state that had slavery, it would tip the balance in the Senate of slave states and free states. He didn't want to deal with that and potentially lead to a civil war, so we didn't touch that.
All right, up next, President John Tyler lost his last chance at re-election because he supported Texas joining the U.S.
It was a very popular position to want Texas to join the U.S., and yet he lost the election. Well, that's because he had flip-flopped on his party on positions on having a national bank, and he was kind of unclear on Texas at certain points. At some point, it was too late. Neither party wanted him. He was too much of a flip-flopper in the views of the electorate. So when he was still trying to hang in the race, he had multiple candidates. Andrew Jackson, our friend Andrew Jackson, came in and was told him to step out of the race so that the next president could actually consolidate votes so they can keep power.
Okay, President James Polk finished all his goals in one term, including adding Texas, so didn't run for re-election and passed away shortly after. He's like, I'm done.
That's exactly right. He did. He accomplished all his goals.
Out.
He accomplished all his goals of getting land, getting Texas, getting Oregon, everything he wanted to do, he got it done.
Okay, and President Zachary Taylor's time in Texas is why the U.S. went to war with Mexico.
False, because he was not president at the time that he was Texas. He was a war hero. He did become president later as a result of his activities in Texas that caused the war with Mexico, which caused the United States to acquire much more land. And let me just say real quick on Texas, the reason Texas matters so much, because what ties together all those presidents that you described is all those presidents in a Texas context are worried about recognizing Texas initially as a Lone Star Republic and eventually join the United States because they don't want to start a war with Mexico, because Mexico was still not happy about recognizing Texas as its own
country. Yeah, well, it's a good thing we did add Texas, because Texas, when it comes to GDP, is the 8th largest GDP in the world. About to be number 7. Watch out, France, we're coming after you, right? So anyway, Raffi, thank you so much. It's so interesting. So like Raffi said, okay, it's okay. The world is not going to end. We've been through this stuff before. All right. It's not the first time we had crazy elections. Whoever wins, we have to just pick up the pieces and keep moving forward. For more information on Raffi and Andonian, visit greatdayhouston.com.